Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, James Delaney, Commissioner of Athletics for the Big Ten Conference. The timing of Mr. Delaney's appearance before the City Club couldn't be better, given the Big Ten's announcement last September of football division alignments beginning in the fall of 2011, this fall, when Nebraska officially begins conference competition. Then there's a February 2nd, 2011 high school football signing date and all the national publicity, some might say hype, surrounding that event. Then there's the fact that the Big Ten currently has the #1 ranked and undefeated college basketball team in the nation in the Ohio State Buckeyes. And we have a national audience today, I will remind you. And then there's the fact that selection day for the NCAA tournament is rapidly approaching, and there are reportedly some Big Ten teams on the bubble. I don't know if you're going to address that during your remarks. When you look at Mr. Delaney's past, you see a person who is well-trained to run the big business known as Big Ten Conference athletics. He's a native of South Orange, New Jersey, and received his undergraduate degree in political science from the University of North Carolina. As a Tar Heel student-athlete, Mr. Delaney was a 3-year member of the varsity basketball team, serving as a tri-captain for a season and participating in the NCAA Final Four twice. Mr. Delaney then earned his law degree from the University of North Carolina School of Law. And after law school, he served as counsel for the North Carolina Senate Judiciary Committee and as staff attorney for the North Carolina Justice Department. Mr. Delaney began his career in intercollegiate athletics administration in 1975 as an enforcement representative for the NCAA. Following that stint, he served for 10 years as the Ohio Valley Conference Commissioner before being named the Big Ten's 5th commissioner in 1989. His accomplishments and changes in the Big Ten since 1989 illustrate the business aspect of the Big Ten Conference athletics. Those accomplishments and changes include expansion of the conference to 11 institutions with the addition of Penn State, and now to 12 with the previously mentioned addition of Nebraska, the launching in August 2007 of the Big Ten Network, whose programming, for anybody who watches it, it's pretty fascinating, includes both academics and athletics, the negotiation of various television agreements, and a firm commitment to event equality through a gender equity plan. In addition to his Big Ten Conference duties, Mr. Delaney has been active in community events, including coaching youth teams and associations with the Special Olympics and the YMCA. Mr. Delaney and his wife reside in Hinsdale, Illinois, and have 2 sons who have followed in Daddy's footsteps and attend the University of North Carolina, which I suspect leads to some very interesting household debates and discussions, especially around NCAA tournament time. I'm very pleased to present, on behalf of the City Club of Cleveland, James Delaney, Commissioner of Athletics for the Big Ten Conference.
Thank you. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to address you today. I think of this less as a speech and more, hopefully, as a conversation. I've been with the Big Ten for 22 years. I've got about 20 years growing up in New York area, New Jersey, and about 20 years in the southeastern part of the United States, and about 20 years now here in the Midwest. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding, at least, of the eastern part of the United States and how these regions interface with each other, how they're a little bit different, and how they all share a passion for sports, and how that passion is expressed, especially here in our area of the country, is very special. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how our universities want to reflect the best values that reside among the people and the communities in these states. Because I think that for us to be successful, we have to not only lead a bit, but also reflect. And I know this, when we do underperform, and we're human and we do from time to time, we hear about it. But it's less about the winning and losing, and it's more sort of about how our athletes, our coaches, and our universities conduct themselves on behalf of the communities, because these are great public institutions. But before I start talking a little bit about our past and our present and our future, I'd like to talk just a little bit about some of the connections we have with some of the other universities in our area of the country. The Mid-American Conference, John Steinbrecher is a present commissioner, Rick Christ is a former commissioner, and the Big Ten institutions have very close ties. We do a lot of things together. We not only play each other on the field, but we do things on initiatives like sportsmanship. We often collaborate on national legislation. And so, we feel that, we're part of something larger than ourselves, and we feel that in order to make change, it's important to collaborate and to cooperate as well as compete. And when I think about the Mid-American Conference, I think about a great athletic conference. I've known many of its leaders. When I was thinking about it just today as I was preparing to speak, and I was thinking about Rick and I was thinking about John. And John was also a former commissioner of the Ohio Valley Conference, and I come from the Ohio Valley Conference. So, we've got Dan Beebe, who's commissioner of the Big 12, who was the former commissioner of the Ohio Valley. We've got John, we've got myself. So there is a lot of continuity and a lot of familiarity among and between people who are running these conferences. But Bob James, I think, was one of the first commissioners, if the first commissioner of the Mid-American, Fred Jacoby, Jerry Apoliti, Carl Benson, Jim Lessig, Rick Christ, and John Steinbrecher. And I knew all those guys, and we were friends. And they collaborated with me before I got here. They had to collaborate with me when I was on the Ncaa enforcement staff, actually. But after I left enforcement, they didn't have to. But in any event, we've been able to do so many good things and do things together. Not only, like I mentioned, in the competitive area, but also in the collaborative area. I think it's important to know a little bit about me to sort of understand how I feel and how I will attempt to explain how I feel about the Big Ten and what our obligations are and why I think intercollegiate athletics has got a place on our campuses. My dad was a high school history teacher and a coach and is in the Hall of Fame at Seton Hall University. He was a basketball and baseball player. He had 5 kids. He was the first person in his family to go to college. And all 5 of his children received undergraduate degrees. In that group, we had some pretty good students. I wasn't one of them, but my sister is on the faculty at UC Davis. My brother was a practicing lawyer. I've got 2 sisters who were teachers, great high school teachers. In that group, not only 5 undergraduate degrees and 2 law degrees, 2 PhDs and a master's. So that tells you something about how important education is in our family, and you don't have to be a great student to value the importance of education. I think it's critical in our communities. I think it's critical in our democracy, and I think it's been an incredibly important part of the upward mobility that people in America have enjoyed. And so I was brought up with the idea that you stay in school, you work hard. I was also brought up with the idea that in competition, there are lessons that are learned as a team member that are lessons that you really can't learn in the classroom. Classroom tests one set of skills, athletics tests another, and athletics, in my view, the way I was raised, was always a test of how you compete on a team, how resilient you are, how responsive you are under pressure, learning to accept victory, learning to accept defeat, and responding to it in a way that's constructive and positive. When you look around in your own families and communities, you'll see a lot of examples of successful people. And I don't know a successful person. I know some successful people who aren't smart. I know some successful people who don't work so hard. I have never seen a successful person who's not resilient. And I would say athletics, whether it's in grade school, high school, or college, teaches the lessons of resiliency, getting off the ground, being optimistic, and moving forward, as well as any academic course that I've ever been exposed to. And so I want to salute the importance of education, but I also want to recognize and salute the importance of competition and team play. And I think that while intercollegiate athletics is kind of an accident of history, When we look at other places in the world, we don't see intercollegiate athletics like we have them here. But whether it's an accident of history or not, it's part of our fabric, it's part of our culture. It needs to be paid, we need to pay attention to it. It's got a lot of positives, and it also presents challenges from time to time. In 1896, Big Ten presidents came together and formed the conference, about 100 years after Cleveland was founded. So we've shared the last 115 years, and I know that this community has been impacted by the Ohio State University and the great rivalries that Ohio State has with other Big Ten institutions, and it's important to your families, and it's important, to us that it's important to your families. I would tell you that, you know, when we define who we are, we try to be honest about that definition, and we try to live up to it. And it's a complex definition, has a number of different elements. We want to be fair. Now, that's an overused word, but I think you know when you see it. We want to be fair to our athletes. We want to be fair to our fans. When I started playing 40 years ago, 50 years ago, intercollegiate athletics was largely, in many parts of the country, white and male. Today, it's far more diverse. The opportunities for women have grown dramatically in the last 25 or 30 years, and there's nothing gender-specific about the lessons you learn from athletics. They're applicable to all people in all times. Teamwork, subordination of the ego, managing in a disciplined way. So it's been great. My dad taught in an inner-city school in Newark, and for a long time, Newark, New Jersey, for a long time those athletes couldn't play in the southern part of the United States when I was growing up. And they would go out to Colorado State, or they would go out to different parts of the country. Now, there are a lot more opportunities, not only here in the Midwest, but also throughout the country. That's been a positive. Intercollegiate athletics and athletics in general tends to be a meritocracy. It's not perfect, but it has tended to lead the way rather than be a lagging indicator. And we're proud of that, and we're proud of being part of that. So fairness is important. Competition is really important. I think competition has driven many of the good things in the Western world. Not unstructured competition, not wildcat competition, but competition with rules that are rational and with collaboration and cooperation. But competition is important to us. We play the games to win. You have to know how to lose, but winning is important. Setting goals are important, and that's important to us. Out of the fairness comes the diversity. That's important to us. You can't deny the fact that we're involved in commercial activity and in some entertainment. But again, that has to be recognized, controlled, and restrained. But for us to say that we're not involved, that belies what you see each Saturday at a Big Ten football stadium. We average 73,000 people in football. Okay? We lead the country for close to 40 years in basketball. And we try to grow the other sports. Paul mentioned that we have a Big Ten network. Well, that's a unique for-profit company. Fox is a joint venture partner, and we have close to 1,000 events on that. Probably 500 or 600 that are on streaming platforms, another 400 that are on the linear network. It's for-profit. And we pay taxes when we're profitable, and we are profitable. But it's also unique in that we've tried to create a network which is in alignment with the values of our universities. We have a commitment to gender equality across all of our platforms, so that of those 800, 900, 1,000 events, literally half of them are available for female student athletes. Okay? So that doesn't happen at other for-profit environments. We also have close to 500 to 600 hours a year in academic programming. We're conscious of some of the binge drinking challenges that exist in our high schools and our colleges. I've got 2 boys. I know about those firsthand. And we don't accept beer advertising. So we're trying to build a mousetrap. We're trying to build a company which not only is profitable and successful, but also is constrained and reflects well on our universities. We're also involved in the education business. We expect the people that are on the fields to go to class. We expect them to graduate. We expect them to perform like the rest of the student body. Do we always succeed? No, we don't. Are there challenges sometime? There are. Do we work on raising standards? We do. Do we work on measuring performance? We do. Are we afraid of transparency of performance? We are not. And so we are about education. The athletic enterprise has got to be integrated and is integral to what we're trying to do. And the last thing is we're public. We have one private institution in Northwestern, but we're public entities. We receive support from the state. We receive support in, on the science side and in other research areas from the federal government. We raise money from people in the community, and we also provide public service back to our states. We also do the research, educate the student, and help civil society to move forward. And the Big Ten Conference feels part of that, not separate from that. Do we always meet the standards that we aspire to meet? No, we're also human. And in being a human, and being in a highly regulated area, mistakes are made. What do you do when mistakes are made? You try to find out why the mistake was made. You try to be honest and straightforward about it. Actions have consequences. And so from time to time you will see that the NCAA or the conference or the institution itself has had to bring things into balance and their consequences for action. So we're part of that community as well. So we have a history and we have a present. And what about the future? The future is challenging for everybody today in many, many ways. The world is changing. It is more global. There are more challenges, but there are also more opportunities. I think that if you really look at the history of college athletics, you will see in many ways the reflection of demographic changes in America, not only racial and gender, but also the migratory patterns in this country. And the Ivy League was a very powerful athletic conference in the 20s and 30s and 40s. It was not to be lost that they were the oldest and most traditional institutions in the country, and that they were also located in the most populated coastline in the Western world. We benefited by the migration of those people across the mountains into the Midwest. We had great communities and have great communities. And now what we're experiencing, I think our rate of growth in our 9 states is about 1/4 of what it is in Texas, California, and Florida. And so that's an advantage they have. By virtue of opening their institutions to all people, we used to have the benefit not only of a great, vibrant ethnic population, native population, but also African Americans were not well accepted at many institutions around the country. You know what? That benefited us athletically. But it's better the way that it is now, that their opportunities are broader. And so we're in an environment that I think that poses challenges, but also has great opportunities. Because we have a brand, Big Ten Sports, which I think enjoys the support of the public, and I think we've earned it. And when we fall short, I think we try to acknowledge it, cure it, and move forward in a constructive way. When I came 20 years ago, I think we were 72% male and 28% female. Today, it's about 50-50. We were servicing 6,000 athletes at 10 universities 20 years ago. Today, we're almost 9,500 athletes with the addition of Nebraska, almost 300 sports teams. And so there are more opportunities for more kids to get an education and to learn the lessons of intercollegiate athletics. And so, I think we're really poised to move forward. Most of our stadia were built in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. And so really 50, 60, 70 years later, you have two options. You can either really fix them and make them sound for the next 50 years, or you can ignore them, or you can do something in between. We've been fortunate that we've had resources and we've been successful, that we've not only been able to create over 2,000 new opportunities for women, but we've been able to restructure and reinvent our stadium for the next 50 years. And so we have the infrastructure, we have the fan support, we're moving forward to be engaged nationally on a variety of initiatives. And I would just mention a few of them that I think that will be great challenges for us and for the universities throughout the country. We need to get better at encouraging K through 12 education. In particular, we need to emphasize the importance of getting good grades in academic core courses. And we need to lead on that by making academic core course quality point averages more important in our initial eligibility. We've done a pretty good job with continuing eligibility. We've done a pretty good job with academic support services. We've done a pretty good job of creating metrics that measure in real time how students are doing. In fact, I would tell you that I think that the universities in general could take a lesson from intercollegiate athletics on capturing in real time the performance of students and putting lots of sunshine on it, because I think that it makes people respond in a way that maybe they don't when things aren't as clear. But in addition to the continuing progress rules, which have been adopted over the last decade, and the metrics for measuring academic progress, I really think it's timely for us to send a message to the K through 12 schools that you're not going to play college sports unless you're going to take academic courses and make good grades. And if we do that, I think they'll meet that challenge. We'll be better off, and we'll have even more success than what we have. I think that a lot has been written and a lot has been said about the thickness of the NCAA rule book. And I think we need to regulate smart. And so I think to some extent we need to re-regulate and look at that which can be overseen and that which can be enforced. And then I think we need to support the NCAA. They need to be more transparent, and they need to be explain better to the public exactly how their systems work. But the public, once they make things more understandable and more transparent, needs to support efforts to hold people accountable, whether they're in the Big Ten or any place else. So they need to get better. We need to regulate smarter, and then we all need to be supportive. And I think it's very important for young people as well as people in college and people in the community to understand the conduct has consequences, whether you're here or someplace else, and support our schools, our universities, our conferences, and our sports organizations. We want the Olympics to stand for something important. We want the NFL to stand for something important. We want the Big Ten to stand for something important, and we want college sports to stand for something important. So that means smart regulation, it means transparency, and it means understanding that actions have consequences, and not all wins have to happen on the field. They happen in how you administer, and you want to administer wisely, and you want to administer transparently, and you want to take the good with the bad. So we can get better in that area. In particular, there are cultures that grow up around youth sports that really make life difficult for families and young people in colleges who are recruiting. So we need to do a better job of having more healthy and more balanced environments in the recruitment process. There's no simple answer to that, but supporting your high schools, supporting your coaches, and supporting your kids so that when they make decisions about where they're going to college, they're about a good fit for that individual at that university and about getting a fair chance to get a good education. And I would say the last thing is we have got to find a way to be smart in measuring outcomes, because I think if you have fair standards and you're clear about it and you understand that actions have consequences, that the best thing we can do is be clear and straightforward and honest about the outcomes that are coming from our young people, put them out there, challenge them. Some teams are 20-10, some are 10-20. Likewise, some universities and some high schools are doing a great job in educating. Let's applaud them. The ones that are not, let's put sunshine on them and expect more and try to support them as best we can. So our past is our past. Our present, we're living in it today, and it really is about being relevant as we go forward. And whether it's expansion, a network, competition on the field or upholding standards. Our goal is to position ourselves in a way to serve our young people, to provide a forum for participation, not only for the athlete, but also for the fan, and also as we move forward to continue to try to provide a constructive a place for Big Ten intercollegiate athletics on our campuses in the region and throughout the country. So let me stop there and see if we can engage in a dialogue. Paul?
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring James Delaney, Commissioner of the Big Ten Athletics. We'll return to him in a moment for our traditional City Club questions. We encourage you to start formulating your questions now and remind you to please keep your questions brief and to the point so we can get as many questions in as possible. Members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we certainly hope that everyone listening will join the City Club and become active in our ongoing civic dialogue. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC, and our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Today is the annual KeyBank Endowed Forum on the Presidency, established with a generous gift from KeyBank to the City Club Forum Foundation. Joining us at the head table today is Karen White, Vice President of Community Relations for KeyBank. Karen, will you please stand and be recognized? Thank you, Karen and Key. We are pleased to welcome guests today at tables hosted by Baker and Hostetler, the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission, Han Lozier, KeyBank, Medical Mutual of Ohio, the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics, and Walter and Haverfield. Thank you all for joining us today. We are also pleased to host students today at our forum who are here as part of our City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Fred E. Scholl Foundation, Bernard L. Carr, Chairman. With us today are students from the Arts Academy, St. Martin de Porres High School, and Cleveland School of Science and Math. Will our students please stand and be recognized? Thank you all for joining us today. Now we would like to return to our speaker for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding microphones today are City Club Marketing and Membership Manager Heather Sikora and City Club Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Good afternoon, sir. It's an honor to have you here. You mentioned in your speech about balance between the conference, the university, and Ncaa. Quite recently here in Ohio, we had, at Ohio State University, we had student athletes who were suspended for the first 6 games of next season for some violating rules. Now, there's been various media outlets like ESPN, for one, who criticized and saying that these student athletes had been in another conference, such as another conference like the SEC. I'm going to mention one report that said that these athletes would have been suspended more severely, like not participating in a postseason game. My question to you is this: what was the role of like a conference like the Big Ten, the NCAA, and the university in determining the punishment for the athletes?
Right. You know, our role is pretty consistent, and it was in that case and in other cases. And that is, you know, we're a fairly highly regulated system. Maybe banks are more highly regulated, but we've got a pretty thick manual of do's and don'ts. And, you know, Ohio State, I think it was on December 10th, became aware that, you know, their student athletes may have been involved in the violation of NCAA rules. And so the first thing they did was investigate it and talk to the athletes and confirm that these things had happened. The second thing you do once you have that information is you turn yourself in. And they reported those violations to the NCAA. The NCAA has a reinstatement process. The school had an obligation to declare the athletes ineligible, which they did do. They also have the opportunity to ask for reinstatement, which they did. And then the reinstatement committee has a series of precedents. Now, this is a very high-profile case, not only here, but throughout the country. But you have to understand there are 400,000 athletes playing under eligibility rules, and it's a very regular occurrence for students to be involved in violations of rules. You don't read about it as much. We probably should have more sunshine on it. I think people would understand better exactly how the system works. This wasn't an infractions case. It was a reinstatement of eligibility case. And they looked at their precedents, and based on the incident involved, they assessed the penalty. I think they still have the opportunity to appeal it, but I think it was a 3 to 5 game penalty, somewhere between 30 and 40% of the season. I think Ohio State has indicated it intends to appeal. What would happen in another conference? I mean, I think that is, media talk, whether it's from CBS or ESPN or the Big Ten Network. It's really, there's a lot of talk. Let's put it this way. It's 24/7. We're in an environment where people are always seeking content to discuss and talk about it. So I don't know who said what about whether it would happen in the Pac-10 or the WAC or the Mountain West or the MAC. What happened here and how Ohio State handled it, I thought was very clear. Find the facts. Actions have consequences. We're voluntary members of the NCAA. You report it. They take their action. You have an opportunity to appeal. You have due process. And then you move forward. And so what might happen in another place is really not my concern. What my concern is being that Ohio State do the right thing, and I think they did in this case. Yeah.
Jim, welcome to the Cleveland region, firstly.
Thank you.
And what I'd like to ask you is, especially coming from a family of educators, how do you address the practice of 1 and done and 3 and done, specifically in the revenue-generating sports?
Yep. I think it's a really hard thing to address. When I was in school a long time ago, we had very few people in football and basketball even make an effort to go directly into the professional game. As time went on, there were a number of legal cases. Also, the athlete became bigger and stronger. And so now, in certain cases in these two sports, you have more direct access. The NFL has a rule. That's a rule that is carved out by agreement between the owners of the NFL and the players of the NFL. It really doesn't involve the NCAA. In the NBA, there's another rule that involves the owners of the NBA teams and the players. That really doesn't involve the NCAA either. My own view is that if you were a great artist, you could go do your art. I certainly would like to see athletes who want to be in school stay longer and get an education, or at least an opportunity for a degree. But there are a few that are very, very talented. I don't think the NCAA should do anything to restrain. I don't think that the NBA rule is a particularly good one. To be honest with you, I think if a young person wants to go and at 15 or 16 or 17 they could play golf, as Michelle Wee did and John McEnroe left after 1 year. Stanford, why we spend so much time obsessing about it. I do think that there's a lot to do on campus in terms of growing up and getting a degree. Very few athletes are ready for the professionals. I think the professionals make their rules to suit them. It's really not about us. What we ought to do is make the best case for being on campus, getting a degree, and growing up. Because we've got 400,000 student athletes. And I'm less concerned about the 5 or 6 or 10 that leave after their junior year for the NFL, or a few that leave to play college basketball after 1 year. I think there's an undue amount of attention paid to a very small number of people compared to what we're trying to accomplish. I would say that I think that, unfortunately, the focus on professional sports as entertainment in some communities is a powerful magnet. But to me, that's a family issue. a community issue. It's not necessarily an NCAA issue.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Thank you for coming to our wonderful city of Cleveland today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you. I was just curious, being female, is there a difference in the grade point average of female athletes to that of male athletes?
Oh, come on. You know the answer to that question.
I do, but I thought I'd make it public.
Transparency. I had 3 sisters, and their quality point average is better than their 2 brothers. And I still think it probably maintains.
Jim, over here.
Mr. Delaney,
Yes, sir.
what is the average graduation rate? What is the graduation rate for Big Ten athletes?
I think that the student body in general, you know, there are 2 rates that are out there that are a little bit confusing. There's a federal rate, which is not as precise as the what I would describe as the NCAA graduation success rate. I think that in general, all of our athletes looked at over a 5 or 6 year period graduate at or slightly above our student bodies. That is not true with all teams, and it's not true for both genders. But generally speaking, the 9,500 men and women who play sports at Big Ten institutions graduate at rates that are very comparable, if not slightly ahead of our student body. But remember this, many of those young people playing athletics have financial aid of one kind or another. We give about $125 million a year of athletic scholarship money. And so one of the reasons that people don't finish school is related to lack of financial resources. So the athlete has probably a little more support financially than the average student, and so that has an effect on retention and success. But overall, all of our athletes compared to all of our student body probably graduate at least as well and perhaps slightly better.
Hello there, sir. I'm a proud graduate of The Ohio State University, so it's an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
Every fall, it seems that there's a conversation about fairness in athletics. You spoke about fairness and equality, about championships and how champions are crowned. And some commentators have said that because of your position, leading the Big Ten, that you are one of the blockers to a championship or playoff system in FBS. What do you say to those commentators, and what are your thoughts on why the BCS is better than a playoff system?
That's 2 questions. Which one do you want? I would say that I'm among many others a supporter of the BCS, and I am for 2 reasons. I think it really gives greater weight and greater interest and greater focus on a regular season, which is really important to us here. We've had 115 regular seasons, and I would tell you since the BCS has been created, I'm not sure we've had 10 or 12 or 15 better seasons in terms of fan interest, people at the gate, people watching it, people talking about it. So I think that the BCS does a great job of making the regular season even more relevant than it has been historically. The second thing is I really do believe in the bowl system. I believe in the Rose Bowl. I believe in New Year's Day games. I believe in the opportunity to celebrate the season in that way. Most of the arguments on both sides have been played out for 13 years. I've had the distinct honor of testifying in front of Congress 3 times on that subject. So my testimony's in the record. But the 2 major reasons are related to affection and for tradition through the Rose Bowl, and also the importance of the regular season games. And to be honest with you, I have been an advocate for the BCS. I've been an opponent to the playoff concept. I was watching a telecast the other night of a basketball game involving Florida and Kentucky, and Dick Vitale, who's a friend, fellow New Jersey person, was talking about the game, and he was saying that one of the coaches involved had really reduced the regular season in college basketball to nothing more and nothing less than a series of seeding games. If you win a game, your seed goes up. If you lose a game, your seed goes down. And it seems to me that's a shame, because there's conference championships, there are rivalry games, there are intersectional games, there are tournament games that all have unique meaning in our communities. And I hate to see any regular season reduced to nothing more or nothing less than a seeding game. And we don't have that in college football, and I hope we never do. Yeah.
Mr. Delaney, you mentioned at great length the value of education, all different levels, and certainly for our universities, that's a major, major role. Big Ten athletic teams provide a tremendous amount of income. They're very successful. To what extent is that income actually used for scholarships for students, and perhaps even to increase the compensation paid to professors and staff at the universities? And do you think that in view of the present economic conditions that are very difficult, that those percentages should be increased?
Thank you. It's a good question. You know, we have been successful, probably more than any other conference. We're self-funded. We're fortunate because most of the Division III, Division II, and Division I schools are funded through central administration. They are, in fact, competing with the School of Business and the School of Mathematics and the School of whatever stripe is on that campus for funds. That happens not to be the case in the Big Ten. I would say that our total subsidies, direct or indirect, are probably less than 5% of what is spent. So the question then becomes, after we pay ourselves for the opportunities, we have about $125 million of financial aid. We obviously have world-class facilities for the training of athletes and hundreds of coaches to support it, as well as the operations of travel and insurance and other things. At some of our universities, and this is a local decision, the licensing, monies coming from licensing, logos and marks, are shared with the university. How that's shared is a local decision. In other cases, there's an actual tax on the revenues in intercollegiate athletics to support other programs at the university. And at one or two of our schools, there are significant subsidies because they simply didn't have the resources. They didn't want to drop men's opportunities, but they wanted added women's opportunities. So there are actual state subsidies, I think, at the University of Minnesota and maybe at Iowa to support those opportunities. But we've been able to grow ourselves through growth. Each institution decides exactly how those are allocated. And I expect in tough times that in a number of cases that the presidents and the athletic directors will work a bargain that drives more money towards academic purposes on that campus. But that's a decision that's a campus by campus decision depending upon local circumstances. Yep.
What is with the current conference alignments taking place, what does that mean for both conference offices and collegiate athletics as a whole? And do you believe that'll be part of any larger trends in the future? Well,
there's been, you're talking about conference expansions around the country? Yeah. They've been going on, quite honestly, for quite a long time. I mean, I think that in the last 20 years of the 30 Division I conferences, I think all but 4 experienced some level of change. I think the Ivy group did not change. The Pac-10 had not changed since 1978. And I think the West Coast Athletic Conference had not changed, but everybody else had changed. There were over 250 institutions that changed conferences. In the highest football division, 71 universities changed. And so that creates logistical issues, scheduling issues, operational issues. I think that, what I would say is that institutions seek, relationships with other institutions that make sense for them, and not only in terms of athletics, but in terms of academics and in common interest. I think overall, it's probably been a healthy reorganization. I think it probably, I'm not saying it's run its course, but I think it's probably settled a bit for a while. I think that the Big 12, has 10 members, and the Big 10 has 12 members. So that's why we focus not too much on mathematics. Except when it comes to selling rights, in which case we hopefully count better than we do with our own members. But in any event, I think it's settling down. I think it's natural. I mean, I think the interesting thing from a really broad perspective is the extent to which institutions rely on athletics, maybe sometimes too greatly, to manage their profile. You know, I mean, we've got our universities have great profile and great scope, and I think make significant contributions historically, presently, in the future. But really, I don't think we really define ourselves by our athletics. I think we define ourselves in other ways. But that's because of the strength of the universities in what they do. Athletics is a huge part of it, but it's not tail wagging dog. It's dog in charge of tail, hopefully. Yeah.
Mr. Delaney, it's very encouraging to hear you link athletics and academics as forcefully as you did. College is there for the whole person, not for a gladiator. And presumably the benchmark is that you don't want someone coming to college unless the person is able to get value out of it and handle the challenges. I like very much and would ask you to expand on your notion that the college athletic world has an opportunity to go to the K-12 world and say, you need to perform not just athletically but academically to make it into our world, and tie young person's achievement to the excitement and the respect that flows to college athletics. Could you expand some on how you hope to accomplish that?
Yep. I'll try. I would say this, you know, if you read the history of college sports on campus, it's a rocky history. I think that early on, a lot of this activity, this energy that was associated with sports was expressed through a club team, not necessarily an intercollegiate team, and it happens to be the history that some of the faculty members felt that they needed actually to control these teams and make sure the students were full-time and make sure that they properly represented the university. And so I don't think that the students went to the university and said, give us a team. I think young people having energy formed teams, and they maybe picked off Yale or Harvard and put it on their sweatshirt, and then the people at Harvard and Yale wanted to make sure that it was done in the right way. And so I think that when that happened, and shortly thereafter President Roosevelt got involved, probably 20 or 30 years later, because there were a lot of injuries connected with the sport of football at the time, and he encouraged the NCAA to have better safety rules. I mean, there were scores and scores of people who died, I think, in the 1904-1905 football season. So when we first got into it, it was the schools trying to get control over these club teams, and then, you know, the NCAA came in on the health and safety side, and for years, I'm talking about decades and decades and decades, there was something called home rule. And that simply meant the NCAA was not going to be the body to superimpose academic rules on a broad and diverse membership. And so what academic rules we had were based on being enrolled in a full-time course of studies, making progress. This conference got involved in standardizing some academic roles in terms of normal progress, probably 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. The NCAA really has only been involved in this area probably for 30 or 40 years. When I was going to school in the 60s and 70s, they had a rule called the 1.6 rule. Probably nobody here has ever heard of the 1.6. But it was an eligibility rule which really tried to tie a student's high school performance into the predictability of his or her ability to make a 1.6 with their fellow freshman classmates, which meant you could be eligible at North Carolina, but maybe not at Clemson, or you could be eligible at Duke, but not at Virginia. And that rule was challenged by a number of people. It was felt that it wasn't fair and equal. And so it eventually was taken off the books, and they substituted for that rule the 2.0 rule. It sounded like it was a little higher than the 1.6, but it wasn't, because anybody could get a C average in high school. So that was the 2.0 rule. And really the floodgates opened up. Academic performance suffered tremendously because, as you know, there's a lot of differences in our high schools and that equality point average. In the 80s, this is a longer explanation than you asked for. In the 80s, we played around with Proposition 48 and Proposition 17, where we actually injected a quality point average with a cut score on the standardized test. That was litigated. There was lots of contentious discussion about the discriminatory features of standardized tests and their poor ability to predict success. And so those went away. What we have today is a sort of a fully indexed initial eligibility, which would allow a very low standardized test score if you had a very high GPA. And we have really increased the continuing progress rules. What I'm suggesting now is that it's time to refocus on those standardized, on those initial eligibility rules. And the research that I have seen would show that a person who's able to do a 2.4, a 2.6, or a 2.8 on a core course GPA, that is the best single predictor of academic success if you were to pick one predictor. It doesn't have any of the negatives associated with standardized tests in terms of cultural bias. And it's something that could be pretty easily implemented, and it would be a great message back to the high schools and back to the students. So we're, as a conference and talking to other conferences, trying to get the NCAA to unveil that research. They have the research, and it's very supportive of that kind of approach. And I don't think that it has to be implemented in a way that deprives people of opportunities, because we're not saying they can't come. We're simply saying they ought to come, make progress for a year, get settled in. They could still have financial aid and have 4 years of eligibility. But I just think it's time, since we've raised the continuing progress rules, that we raise the initial eligibility rules, and I think it would serve everybody well without really discriminating or negatively impacting anybody. If somebody says, I'm a poor student and I don't want to do that, then I think that's a pretty strong message that they're not committed to coming in and making progress and pursuing a degree. And then I think that's not on us, that's on that individual choice.
All right, Mr. Delaney, yeah. I have two questions actually. For my students, how hard is your job? Can you explain the difficulties of your job? And then my second question, I've been to Indianapolis for the Big Ten basketball tournament and Chicago when it was at Chicago one time. Can you explain the process of maybe Cleveland hosting that type of tournament?
You just got two microphones here. You got two questions, so I'll use. Hey, my job is a challenging job. It's an energizing job. It's a fun job. The thing that makes it fun is, and you know, something that keeps me coming back are really the people I work with and work for, because we're sort of all in it together. I can't tell you that how our presidents and our athletic directors and our faculty and our coaches are in it together. They would not be shocked. You haven't heard anything here that they haven't heard before. And these kinds of conversations occur at the time of the hiring. They occur before the kickoff luncheon of the tip-off luncheon. They know they have a special responsibility. And so, you know, working in that environment with, you know, schools that are committed to the conference, you don't do a Big Ten network without everybody being all in, and you don't have the kinds of camaraderie and all for one and one for all that we have without people being on the same page. They're competitors, but they're also collaborators. With regard to location of venues, for years we didn't have a conference basketball tournament. We've only had one for, I guess, maybe 13 years. We started it in Chicago. We experimented with Indianapolis. Both cities have worked well. We've talked about going to Minneapolis and to Cleveland and to New Jersey and to other places, but we found Chicago and Indy to be central and to be great venues, and they've worked well. With regard to the football championship, it was a sort of a hectic year because the selection of Nebraska happened in a 6-month time frame. It happened pretty quick. And we needed to do a lot of things, establish divisions and sell television. And so we identified Lucas Oil as a new facility, a town we were familiar with, could do a turnkey, and sort of identified it. Our athletic directors are in a position to provide some guidance sort of going forward. I think that in the short term, Chicago and Indy will be the places we look. I think in the long term, we'll look more broadly. And I think if we look more broadly, I think that Cleveland would be in that group, along with Minneapolis, probably along with Detroit, probably along with I think Philadelphia, I think Pennsylvania. Each of our schools, Ohio State speaks positively about Cleveland. Minnesota speaks positively about Minneapolis, Minnesota. People in Illinois and Northwestern speak positively about Chicago. And Purdue and Indiana speak positively about Indianapolis. None of that should be shocking. But at least at the present time, the focus has been on Chicago and Indy as good central locations.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to a Friday forum featuring James Delaney, Commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. Thank you very much, Mr. Delaney. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.